Hello friends, and a very good evening. Today I'm going to talk about the post-structuralist lens of the queer, which is basically how post-structuralism and the tenets of post-structuralism helped in the formation of the queer and the queer theory. Uh, while talking about this topic, I would uh, like to bring to everyone's notice that I would be focusing primarily on Michel Foucault and his works, his explorations, his groundbreaking linking of sex, sexuality, identity in relation to power, knowledge, and discourse serve as a very important catalyst for the coming of the queer. Uh, Also, I'd like to bring to everyone's notice that there are several other theories and critical thinkers who have had their immense contribution in this field of queer. Yet, the reason why I chose Michel Foucault is that the influence of Michel Foucault in this regard is more fundamental than any other critical thinkers or theories. So now coming back to post-structuralism, let us take a quick look on what post-structuralism is. Post-structuralism as a field of study challenges binary opposites. This field of study questions how certain facts and beliefs that come to be accepted as the truth uh, are just constructions, are just creations, some products rather than a discovery. They hold the view that there is no fixed stability nor entity. Rather, there are only possibilities. And this coming of post-structuralism and the very idea or the very notion of questioning fixed entities uh, serve as a very important foundation for this coming of the queer. Also, during post-structuralism, the theorization or uh, the idea that sexuality, identity, race, all these things are provisional and contingent paved the way for queer entrance. So that was a brief take on what post-structuralism is and how post-structuralism challenges any established truth or questions the certain facts and beliefs that we come to know as truth and also our views. Okay, so now before we go deep into uh, the contributions of Michel Foucault or discuss about the influence of Michel Foucault in this field of queer, let us trace the development of the word queer. Let us trace the origin of the word queer and how it has traveled to this and recent times. The word queer comes from the German word queer, Queer, which meant oblique or pervert. So, from the very beginning, the word has always had a negative connotation. Now, the word queer coming into the English language as an adjective, it meant uh, odd. It meant odd. It meant someone who is odd, someone who is strange, someone who is crazy, unnatural, a person who has strange or crazy behavior. So this is what the meaning of the word queer meant in the 16th century in the English language. Gradually, the word queer took a verb form, and in the verb form, the word queer meant to ruin or spoil something. See, the word queer, no doubt the form, no doubt the form of the word queer. Let it be an adjective, let it be a verb, or let it be a noun. The word this word has always had a negative connotation attached to it. The very essence of this word is something that is strange, something that has the ability to disrupt the balance, to disrupt the norm, to disrupt the natural. The most serious and important intervention regarding this word queer came by the end of the 19th century. The word queer, which had already been used as a derogatory term, which had already been used to imply people who were odd, who were strange, who were crazy, was now used to imply individuals who were involved in same-sex love or in same-sex desire. See, this was a serious taboo. This was a very serious taboo, and those people or those individuals who were involved in such acts were condemned uh, and were seen as unnatural beings. Their acts were never appreciated, nor their acts were recognized, but they were outcasted from the society. They were stoned. Uh, they were lynched, and we have already heard of gay bashing. We have already heard of the bashing of the people from the queer community, how we treat people from the queer community in a very inferior way. uh, Anyway, the term queer that we know now, or the term queer in its most recent sense, came to be popularized in the early 1990s. Mm, as I mentioned earlier, that several critical theories, several thinkers, various movements such as the African American Liberation Movement, such as the feminisms, such as the emergence of gay and lesbian studies, uh, new new critical thoughts regarding identity, regarding sexuality, regarding gender. Uh, every field of study actually contributed to lay the foundation of the queer and the queer theory. Now let us go back to Foucault and trace how Foucault's ideas serve as a catalyst to the queer theory. Uh, See, one of the most important things that we ought to know is that traditionally, sexuality was viewed as a natural feature of human life. Sexuality was seen as an innate mechanism, a system, an inner system. On the contrary, Foucault thought otherwise. He was of the view that sexuality does not simply mean the natural expression of some inner desire or drive. Foucault argues that our perception or belief of sexuality as a natural feature or phenomenon, an effect of our human lives, are nothing but a construction, a creation of such views. Foucault believes that sexuality has little to do with our biological origin or our biological dimension. Rather, Foucault believes that sexuality has more to do with our social, cultural, and historical experience. So, what does Foucault mean when he says, or what does Foucault mean by his statement, by this statement? According to Foucault, sexuality is a construction, a very calculated production of our society, of all the knowledges, of all the power established institutions that work in our society. One more important thing to note is that Foucault, he was not interested in what is sexuality. He was not keen on defining sexuality. Rather, his main focus was on how sexuality is constructed, how the society constantly produces this idea of sexuality, how sexuality functions in the society. While many consider that sexuality or any talk on sexuality was repressed starting from the 17th century to more repressions, prohibitions, and censoring of speech and writing in the 19th century, Foucault analyzed all these evidences and he rejected this repressive hypothesis. According to Foucault, it was from the 18th century onwards that sexuality was considered something which was to be regulated, which was to be administered rather than judged. Also, Foucault cited evidences from various sources such as the religious institutions, from the laws and the legal affairs, the governments, the state, from the medical sciences that actually proliferated the discourses about sexuality and uh, validated heterosexuality as the norm, as the natural form. According to Foucault, during that period, during this period, during the late 18th century and the 19th century, all other deviances or all other diversions were seen as unnatural, and for individuals who were non-conforming to the heterosexual society, uh, for them, there were the therapists, there were the analysts, there were the counselors who were always there to help them and straighten them out. Such discourses of sexuality, according to Foucault, validate the power structure in human relationships so much that they regulate, govern, and construct our personal identity regarding sex, sexuality. Coming further to the analysis and arguments of Foucault regarding sex, sexuality, and identity, Foucault was of the view that homosexuals or the homosexual identity uh, is a very recent social construction, and Foucault believed that this construction grew out of a particular context during the 19th century, particularly in the 1870s and the growth of the medical science. Foucault believed that homosexuality, like sexuality, is not a discovered identity but a constructed category of knowledge. See, we all know how uh, how this same-sex love between individuals existed long before 18th century, long before 17th century. For instance, we have Anna Maria Gose citing that that uh, long before there was Sappho, and then the Roman kings. Then we come to we come to England. We have figures such as William Shakespeare, who is widely speculated to be involved in a homosexual relationship. Then we have Oscar Wilde. We have many other notable figures, those who are involved in same-sex love. So this same-sex love or same-sex desire is not a new thing that we know. Rather, this idea of homosexuality was created so as to validate heterosexuality, uh, so as to think of heterosexuality as the norm, so as to see the homosexuals as the inferior, as the unnatural beings. Now, coming to uh, coming to the 19th century, Foucault mentions that it was from the 19th century onwards that the religious viewpoint to homosexuality was changed or was shifted to the perspective of medical sciences. See, earlier homosexuality uh, was related to sodomy, and before 18th century, the punishment of sodomy was death. What happened after this 18th century or during the 18th century was that this sodomy, the people who were involved in this act of same-sex love or in same-sex desire, they were categorized as a species. They were called the homosexual species. Earlier, the punishment was against this act which the society considered as unnatural. But during the 18th century and after the 18th century, the whole stigmatization of being unnatural was fixed, was implanted to this category of this species called homosexuals, or or to the homosexual identity. Foucault. Foucault was highly critical of this construction of identity and further categorization. He implied that such discourses and mechanisms which constructs this homosexual identity constrains this subject. This categorization of identity limits the homosexual subject and thereby privileges the heterosexual identity. This categorization, this stigmatization of homosexual identity makes or establishes the heterosexual as the norm, as uh, the upper beings, as the natural form. Therefore, we see that this construction of identity, this construction of the ideas of sex and sexuality, the production of the category of homosexuality so as to facilitate the heterosexual as the norm, so as to see heterosexuality as the natural feature of our life, is what Michel Foucault critically examines and explores. Foucault's deconstruction of the notions of sex, sexuality, identity, and how we perceive those in society, along with how power and knowledge and how they act as agents in the discursive construction of of the idea of sexuality, of the idea of homosexuality, or the idea of uh, heterosexuality, um, in the line of post-structuralism, is what uh, that provides the foundation for queer